Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about savoring every bite, the art of mindful eating with Zoe Nicholson, who came to our studio today in Melbourne. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lou. Nice to be here.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to introduce you and then I'm going to ask you to share more with us about yourself because that's the fun part, to get to know you. So for our audience, Zoe founded her dietetic practice, Love What You Eat, in 2004. A love of food is key to Zoe's success as a dietitian, and one of her primary goals is to help people stop dieting and instead establish a positive relationship with food and their bodies. She takes immense pleasure in seeing people change the way they think about food and health, which enables them to enjoy all food and feel more comfortable in their body. Zoe uses the intuitive eating framework and health at every size principles and is a member of Size Inclusive Health Australia. Zoe also holds a keen interest in food intolerance and gut issues, and this area of nutrition accounts for around half her clientele. Very wonderful introduction and bio there, Zoe. And I'm keen to find out more about this because, I personally love food, but I never thought about, actually work in the industry or, be a dietitian. There's got to be something there in your story that led you here. So how did you get here and why did you choose to do this work?
Yeah, no, good question. So I knew very early on that I wanted to be a dietitian, but not for the same reasons that I want to be a dietitian now. So if we go all the way back, rewind all the way back to the mid-90s and me finishing high school, and part that the career choice of going into dietetics stemmed from sometimes this is a long story, but I might cut a long story short and let your listeners know that it stemmed from almost developing an eating disorder myself, where I went through a phase where I was in a naturally small body, but some advice to do with my skin, cutting out certain foods. I had the acne, as lots of teenagers do, and I lost some weight, and then I got people started commenting. I was already thin, and then I lost more weight, and people were like, "Oh my God, you're so thin, you look amazing, what do you do?" And I kind of developed this idea of sharing what I was eating and how much I was exercising. But that did get close to, was heading down the path of an eating disorder. But fortunately, I had a very supportive family and some really supportive teachers who I really respected who managed to pull me out of that. And I managed to sort myself out, which is not the case for everyone. I think can be a real slippery slope into eating disorders. And anyone listening to this who has not just teenage daughters, but sons, and they're worried about eating disorder behaviours. Having a really supportive family, of course, is important, but sometimes it's not enough. So seeking professional help if necessary is also really important. I was fortunate that I was able to pull myself out of it, and then sort of went on, finished school, decided I want to be a dietitian. And my thinking then was I want to help people lose weight, but in a healthy way, so not dieting or restricting, which was what I was doing. The counting all my calories and then going to the gym and burning them all off, definitely not a healthy behaviour. I thought I can do it in a healthier way without restricting any food so people can still enjoy eating, because I loved cooking and eating. And so for the first 8 to 10 years of my practice, I've been practicing for almost 20 years, I operated more I was the dietitian you would go and see to try and lose weight. And we would use meal plans and people would follow those meal plans, and yes, people would lose weight, but then they'd put it back on again. Mm-hmm. I learned very quickly in my career that weighing people wasn't a good idea, or focusing too much on weight wasn't a good idea. so I sort of tried to take the focus off weight, but there was still this idea that if you just eat less and move more and, you can lose that weight and you'll feel better about yourself. But that's in most cases is not the case. And it was probably in 2010, 2012, I can't remember it right now, but that I got approached by a dietitian who actually runs the Size Inclusive Health Australia. So Fiona Willer, started the non-diet approach for dietitians, a different way for dietitians to work with their clients. And she just cornered me at a conference, I like to say, and said, I've seen what you're about, and I sense that this might be a better fit for you than what you're currently doing. And I sort of read through some of the info and thought, I'm already doing that. And then realised I wasn't, that I was still very much part of the diet industry. And by putting people on a meal plan to lose weight, I was essentially still putting them on a diet. And it did make sense why 2 years later, 5 years later, 7 years later, they're calling me back up and saying, I saw you 5 years ago and I lost 10 kilos, but now I've regained it. And they feel like they've done something wrong. So when I started reading about, so there's a framework called intuitive eating. So it's a book written by 2 American dietitians. So when I learned about this non-diet approach using this intuitive eating framework, it, in a sense, didn't change my philosophy, but completely transformed the way I practiced with people. So the intuitive eating approach non-diet approach is taking the focus off trying to lose weight, and it's more about health behaviours. So helping people to eat in a way that is, yes, nourishing, but also pleasurable. And it's about tuning into appetite. We might talk about more at the end with the open mic question, as you said earlier. So just not to, otherwise we could spend the whole podcast talking about intuitive eating, which we won't do. But that really, as I said, transformed my practice. And so the last 10 years I've been using this intuitive eating framework and alongside the food intolerance side of things that I do. And it's just so much more rewarding to help people, feel liberated around food, to feel freer, to just better enjoy food and not have to track what they're eating or worry about what they're eating. And actually when people have that freedom, and I know I said I wasn't going to go into intuitive eating, but essentially it's about trusting your own body with food again. So rather than having to follow a meal plan, having to follow external advice on what, when, or how much to eat, it's learning how to trust your own body again. And it makes eating a lot more pleasurable. It frees up so much mental space, so you just don't have to think about food so much. So it's really rewarding to be able to help people enjoy food, not feel the guilt and shame about eating certain things, and really helping people that are struggling with body image, which is another big piece to the picture as well. Yeah,
totally. I mean, that's such a great story, and it's your professional development as well. And I think that's been the same struggle for a lot of people, even not in your field, but just learning about how to actually tune into their bodies and have a healthy relationship with food. That's hard, big topic.
It is, and it's very hard in, I was going to say, our current diet culture. We've been in a diet culture, I don't know, probably since Weight Watchers opened its doors in, I think it was the 50s, not the 1950s. So, but it's almost like diet culture is becoming more and more pervasive, and it seems that more people than not are dieting in some way, shape or form. A lot of people wouldn't consider themselves to be dieting, but that's where, when I explain to my clients, really the easiest way to think about, okay, is what I'm doing in the realms of dieting, or is it more like intuitive eating, which essentially should just be normal eating? So if you are following external advice, if you're not tuning into your body's appetite cues, your hunger, your fullness, responding to your body's needs for food, instead you're following a diet plan, maybe a keto diet, intermittent fasting, all of that really is the modern definition of the word dieting, and that's the norm. More people than not are doing that now, and that's what most people think that they should be doing or need to be doing to manage their health. But that's what certainly creates all the increase in eating disorders, disordered eating, but so many people just feeling stressed around food and their bodies.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's a big topic in itself, and today we're going to talk about mindful eating. I mean, it's quite different from intuitive eating, which is something that you want to talk about in depth later on. So we won't go there yet. Otherwise, we're going to spoil everything. Anyway, let's get to know you a bit better. We're going to get some of your recommendations, things that you love, things that speak about you. First of all, what is a book you would recommend?
Oh, gosh. Put me on the spot. So many. I love reading. Reading is one of my things I like to do when I've got some spare time to lay out in the backyard or just on the couch. I have a bookshelf full of books. I'm actually going through the process of rereading everything. It's so hard to give you a favourite book because
you can give us, multiple. If it's hard to choose one, you can give us multiple.
There's a book called Life and Death in Shanghai that I first read as a teenager, and then I've sort of reread that quite a few times. That's a fascinating book about the Cultural Revolution. So I love books where you can. There's a story. This is actually a biography or autobiography that Nian Cheng, the author, wrote it with the assistance of someone else. And then that reminds me of a book called Evil Cradling, which I'm trying to think of the author now. Again, someone who ended up in detention, and now I'm trying to remember what country, whether it was Iran. There's an Indian author, Rohinton Mistry, who's written, I love his book, So A Fine Balance is brilliant. And then that reminds me of Shantaram, which probably lots of people are familiar with. That was a very popular book. Margaret Atwood has always been a favourite author of mine, and loved Handmaid's Tale. Never actually really got into the series on TV, but I love the book. Amy Tan is another author I love. So I'll stop there, otherwise I'll keep going.
Yeah, well, I have to say those are all new things that I haven't read. So, taking notes of them for myself, definitely. That's really great. So what about a movie? And again, if it's hard to choose one, feel free to pick multiple.
No, that's easy.
Okay.
Aliens. The second, or Aliens as opposed to Alien, and the special edition. So it's still my top movie of all time, and I can recite most of it. I can still know a lot of lines without even watching it if I watch it, which I did recently when I was unwell and then watched it. So we watched it loads as kids, and we'd be on holidays and my sister and I would be in our bunk beds and I'd say one line and she'd say the next line.
Oh, wow.
So, and I just still love it today, even having watched it a couple of months ago.
Very nice. Well, it's so much easier to choose than books then, from the movie perspective. Now, you said that you've been on quite a few podcasts as a guest. I don't know if you personally listen to podcasts. And if you do, which one would you share as a recommendation?
Maintenance phase at the moment. Like, there's so many good podcasts. So when podcasting first became a thing, would we say sort of 2015, 2016? Is that they sort of really hit the scene?
Well, I first got into it in 2018, so I don't know what to tell you.
That might be, So there was another brilliant one, Life Unrestricted, which I am on that podcast. Not for that reason, and am I recommending it though? But that doesn't run anymore, but you can still find that on Spotify. Then there's a couple of American dietitians that run really good podcasts. One used to be called Love Food. It's now called Find Your Food Voice. But the maintenance phase, I would be surprised if you don't at least have some listeners who have heard of that, because that's gone a little bit viral. It's tackling all the topics on, and this is why I do these little air quotes, like health and wellbeing. So actually breaking down all these, the quote unquote wellness industry.
Right.
So for people in Australia, I would encourage them to start with the ones on Pete Evans. They're just hilarious. But the podcast is American. They have also looked into Gwyneth Paltrow and her goop, but they also tackle big issues like the whole, and I quote unquote, obesity epidemic, and how, is being fat bad for you? All of these assumptions that our culture has around weight and health, they really go into a lot of depth. How the body mass index, the BMI, should not be used as a health indicator. So there's some great entertainment on there. There's some brilliant science. So Aubrey Gordon, who runs it, and Michael Hobbs, they dive right into the literature, and so they're very researched, and so there's a lot of really good information, but they're also very entertaining.
Oh, that's really cool to know. Yeah, great. I haven't listened to that one, so now you've sold it. I will listen to it. Next question is about your role model, and I wonder who that is. I assume this could be, someone in your life, or a famous person, or you have multiple.
What if I don't have any?
And that's also okay.
You know what the funniest thing when you said that, first picture that came into my mind was my golden retriever, Bailey.
Oh, actually, I have a few guests who have their pets as their role models.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, my role model would probably be my cat Taro. There you go.
There you go.
Perfect. Final question in this part. What is a course you've completed that really has a strong impact on you?
Well, I'd have to say the non-diet approach course. So obviously I did dietetics to become a dietitian. Did do some really interesting postgraduate counselling based courses, but I'd say, doing the non-diet approach training definitely changed the course of my career. And
yeah. Well, I can clearly see that you're passionate about what you do, so that's beautiful. And that is the part of Have You Met Zoe? So we've got to know you even better now, and let's talk about well-being and mindful eating, which is what we're here for today. First of all, each person has a very different approach or, perspective on well-being. So what is yours?
Okay, so well-being, there's so many different aspects of well-being. And unfortunately, what our quote unquote wellness industry has done, or our culture, let me say, has done, has really narrow it down to the food that we're putting into our body and how we look. There's this idea that well-being looks a certain way and you're doing certain things. And it's so much bigger than that. So I often talk with my clients about there is 7 defined aspects of health. There's 4 of them that I talk about with my clients because they're the relevant ones, although financial health absolutely comes into it. It's probably a whole nother topic. But the 4 main ones that I talk about that really make up our well-being, we have our social health, we have our emotional, our mental health, spiritual health, what's important to us in life, what do we value, and then, yes, we have our physical health. But it's like all the focus or the spotlight is on our physical health. And what happens to so many people is when they put too much emphasis on their physical health, all those other aspects of health start to suffer. So a lot of what we see on the internet and we hear what influencers are doing and what's seen as health or wellness on TV is a very narrow view of well-being, and it's very focused on the physical, and there's lots of collateral damage to that, which is the clients I see.
Yeah, I could imagine. I think it's actually a big problem and much bigger than we would appreciate, because for me, like I didn't grow up here, and when I moved from Vietnam to Australia, I was like, oh, it's such a different world here. But still, there are issues around, the diet culture. And like you were saying, like these different emphasis on physical health and physical sort of like how we present ourselves. And there's no emphasis on mental health or not much.
Yeah.
But when I really think about it and reflect on, me being brought up, growing up, it's like the definition of well-being at home in my family is always, gotta look a certain way, gotta like keep up your weight a certain way. If you're kind of like gaining a bit of weight, that's, you don't have your well-being, you're not put together. And, financial health is also a really strong emphasis in our culture, not so much on mental health and, other aspects. And so I think it's interesting, it varies country to country, and because our audience is quite global, I think everyone can resonate with this in a certain way, because, each culture would put emphasis on different things. But I think the physical aspect of it has been sort of really just like pertinent, like it's right there in front of our face every day. And I think it's funny, actually, when you said that, because I immediately think of this instance where I visited my family, I think for the Christmas holiday last year. And the first thing they said, no questions asked about, my overall well-being whatsoever, was like, why are you so fat? And I was like, what? I don't even think I'm fat, and everyone's like, oh, you should exercise, eat less. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm here for the holiday and I'm supposed to be enjoying the Vietnamese food that I haven't had in a long time. So, can I just enjoy it? And then, I'll take care of my body. If I'm not feeling great, then, I'll go to the gym. And, and then another instance is also really funny. I had this conversation with someone a long time ago, and then they were like, you go to the gym every day and then you look at the food you eat. And I'm like, so I feel great. Like I feel healthy. So what's the problem with me eating these kinds of food? And I don't even know what the intention was for that person to say that, but it was just like this misconception of well-being. Like if I'm taking care of my body in different aspects, especially for me, mental health is super important. That should be, the way that my well-being is. And if I'm taking care of my well-being, that's great. Why is there such a strong emphasis on if I'm going to the gym, then I'm not allowed to eat certain things? That's just hilarious.
I know. So there would be no well-being if there was no human connection, if there were no relationships. So I sometimes use an example, a scenario with my clients and say, let's say we gave you a magic pill that meant you were never going to become unwell. You've got this perfect health and you have exactly the body the world says you should have. But in order to take this pill and have that, quote unquote perfect body and perfect health, you have to live alone on a stranded island somewhere. How well do you think you would be? Yeah, and I think so. Maybe this is where we can start blaming capitalism. Not that I'm anti-capitalist, but you can't sell human relationships and human connection. Or maybe you can. Someone's probably working on it. Whereas you can sell the quote unquote ideal body. You can sell the perfect diet. You can sell an idea of physical health. So I think yes, the capitalism that we live with has allowed the overemphasis on physical health to get way out of control.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's this massive stigma around it as well when, we are trying to take care of ourselves and, the physical health aspect. It might seem like some people are struggling or they are not doing things that they are supposed to be doing, but the progress is not that recognized. I think, baby steps, right? And you're a dietitian, that, even the relationship with food and when we're kind of taking care of our physical health, there will be fluctuations. There will be days that are better than others. And I think that needs to be recognized. And, it's that encouragement that matters, especially in the context of relationship that you were talking about. It's such a big thing in well-being because when you surround yourself with people that actually understand that journey, it's not linear. It's not like, every day is perfect. That's how you're going to flourish.
Exactly. So I often use the term fluid. Our health is such a fluid thing. Getting to that point where you are eating intuitively, it's going to be fluid. It doesn't look a certain way. I actually heard someone on a podcast say many years ago, and I love this, that we all bounce around on the spectrum of health. So I think there's this idea that like health doesn't have an end point.
Yeah.
There's no point at which you have achieved a certain level of health and you're going to stay there. But I think that's the misperception that a lot of people have. And just as you were saying, and as I'm often saying to my clients is there's no right way to eat. There's no perfect when it comes to your eating. It is going to be very fluid. Some days you'll get lots of veggies in and some days you might not eat any veggies.
Yeah.
And some days you eat more chocolate than others and all of that is fine. All of that, eating, even if you had an entire day and all you ate was chocolate, that's not going to adversely affect your health in any way, shape or form. You might feel a little bit sickly by the end of the day, but you could have a week and not touch a vegetable. That is not going to impact your overall health.
That's a really good point. And that applies to the whole concept of well-being in general too, because our well-being fluctuates, right? One of the biggest misconceptions about well-being that we've addressed on this show is it has to be this perfect state. Like it has to be a certain way all the time, which is never going to happen.
Nope.
It fluctuates. So you've worked with a lot of people specifically in, dieting and trying to not let them let dieting get into their way. So kind of like the word diet here is like used really funnily, but you probably have noticed quite a few misconceptions that people have about their own overall well-being. So what would they be?
That the biggest one, the first one that comes to mind is that they must lose weight to improve their health. And that is that's the common wisdom, if you like. And in saying this is going to sound very counterculture, the opposite of what most doctors are saying, this idea that if you have put on weight or if you are seen to have extra weight, that you need to lose that weight to improve your health. And that is not the case at all. And sort of one way to try and wrap your head around that is if you are someone and you've decided, okay, I want to make some changes to improve my health or well-being, there are certain behaviours that you can change. Whether you might become more active, you might become more social, you might start up a hobby, you might change how you eat, you might decide to get more sleep, have less stress, all of those things. They're all behaviours that you can influence. Your weight is not a behaviour. But there's this idea that people, in order to improve their health, must lose weight. And then I guess what the research shows, and because that's what people say, but all the research shows that, losing weight improves health. But people don't just lose weight. They change their behaviours, and yes, they see some health benefits. There may be weight loss as a side effect. And what our culture does is it pins the medal on the weight loss rather than the behaviour changes or the fact that someone's blood sugars come down, etc. So that's probably the biggest issue that I tackle with my clients, or misperception of what's necessary to improve their well-being.
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good point. I love that so much because we haven't mentioned that on this show before, but I think that's so important, especially with the example that I just gave you, right? Like, the second people see me, I'm like, oh my gosh, why are you so fat? You're going to lose weight. And I was like, but I'm okay. I feel great. I don't really have to do that just because you say so. And yeah, I think a lot of people can resonate with this because everyone has this pressure. Oh, I've gained like 5 kilos. I need to lose those 5 kilos. What if you just keep them? As long as you feel healthy.
People can be in fat bodies. People can be at a higher body weight. People can have BMIs over 30 and really good health.
Yeah.
That's
great to know.
Yeah.
There you go. That's great to know.
But that is the opposite of what our world thinks as a whole, or what, our well-meaning doctors and physios and most dietitians are saying. I didn't touch on that earlier, but those of us in the dietetic profession who use this non-diet approach are certainly still in the minority. Sorry.
Okay. That's
so mainstream dietetics is still fairly weight-centric, like our mainstream medical profession. It's very what we call weight-centric. So that Health at Every Size model, or Size Inclusive Health Australia, is saying, okay, let's help people improve their health if they're ready to do so.
Yeah.
But let's take weight out of the equation.
That's such a progressive approach because I don't think I've heard that before. And, it's good. It's good that we have you on the show to talk about this. Now, we are here to talk about mindful eating, particularly. I know that we have been saying, it doesn't matter, some people can gain weight, be a bit on the chunkier size compared to usual, and that's totally fine. They're still healthy. But mindful eating is something that I think is actually quite interesting of a concept that I learned, I think, last year. I came across a YouTube video somewhere that talked about it. But from your perspective as a dietitian, what is that? What exactly is mindful eating?
Yeah, no, great question. And I think earlier you said, sort of alluded to it being different to intuitive eating. It's part of the intuitive eating framework.
Okay, yeah.
So, but we'll come back to that. Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify that because sometimes people think that they're the same thing, and it's not that they're not. They're intertwined.
It's good to put it in context.
Yeah. So I guess mindfulness, the definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness being present in the moment without judgment. So that this is specifically with food. So it really is connecting with your food. So it's you're recognizing that you're hungry. You've decided, I wouldn't mind some hot chips. And then you've sort of, maybe you've gone to the pub like I would and got a beer alongside your hot chips. And they come out and you're like, oh, God, they look good and they're nice and crunchy and they've got some salt on them. And so visually you're looking at them and already starting to enjoy them. And as you eat them, you're tasting them. So you're noticing how the food feels in your mouth, how it tastes. And then as you're eating, just noticing how it's feeling in your body. But one thing I'm always at pains to say with all my clients is there's no correct way to eat mindfully. So mindful eating is not being all zen and sitting in silence with no distractions, being 100% focused on your food. You can do that if you want to, but I think that would be fairly weird.
I mean, I've seen a YouTube video of someone doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. They said it themselves. It was pretty weird, but also enjoyable. So, but did you do that once? Probably.
You might have. Yeah. So when I introduce the mindful eating exercise to my clients, I say, look, you'll probably only do this the one time, if you do it at all. Often people don't actually need to go through the really slow process of spending a minute or two looking at their food and then really tasting it and really savouring it. Some people do that and I find it really helpful, but I guess the idea is that when you eat, there's just a little bit more, there's just enough awareness of you're hungry, how hungry you are, what you feel like eating, and as you're eating the food, actually really enjoying that food. But we can eat mindfully even when we're in a rush. Happens to me. I've got half an hour for my lunch break. Client runs 15 minutes over. I'm like, oh shit, excuse my French, what I've got for lunch today might take a few minutes to prepare, and then I've got like 5 minutes to eat it. And so I'm eating it super fast. But there's still a level of mindfulness because I've recognized I'm hungry. I'm still enjoying the food. I'm slightly annoyed that I've got to eat it so quickly, but that's okay. So
That's good to know, because I was going to ask you, what if we don't have a lot of time?
Exactly, yeah. And most people have distractions.
Yeah.
And again, like particularly if you've got young kids, but I also work with a lot of clients who live alone. Now, to sit at the dining table in silence on your own eating, like I said earlier, feels a little bit weird. Eating is a really social thing. It's a really communal thing. So I think for people who live alone or you're having a meal on your own, it's really natural, really normal to want to be doing something else.
Yes.
And you might be
Can
watching
confirm.
TV, you might be on your phone,
Yeah.
but it's just, if you are so engrossed in what you're watching on TV or consumed by whatever you're doing on your phone that you aren't paying attention to what you're eating. Or I feel like everyone's had some version of this experience where they might be working away, they've got a sandwich for lunch, they're working away, they go to get the other half of their sandwich and it's gone. And you didn't register eating it. And if you don't register eating the food, then you won't feel satisfied. So satisfaction is actually the key aspect of mindful eating, which I'll get into in a sec. But the importance of tasting our food. So taste buds have a couple of important functions, but actually tasting our food is so important in terms of getting the pleasure from the food. Like we are meant to get pleasure from food. That person that said, if it tastes good, it must be bad for you, needs to be whacked on the head with a frying pan. So getting pleasure from food is really important for just our well-being. Pleasure is an important part of well-being for satisfaction, but it also helps our brain to register that there's food and energy coming in. So tasting the food is part of the satiety process where leptin is our main fullness hormone, and for leptin to do its job to let our brain know that we're satisfied, we've eaten enough, we need to be aware that we're eating. Otherwise, that's where we find, we've eaten the whole bag of chips and scraping the bottom of the bag and like, oh my God, did I eat all those? And so I'm like, oh, I feel so full.
Yeah, that's so good to know, because I used to live alone and I was like, oh, I noticed that I ate more when I was eating alone. But now that you're saying that, it's okay, because I was always having something on TV, like whether it be like a YouTube video or a show. And I was like, oh, is it because I'm like watching these shows I'm eating more? But then when you mentioned the aspects of eating socially, I also realized that when I eat with other people, I eat less.
Yeah.
That's interesting of an observation for me. But then when you kind of describe that concept of mindful eating, I was like, actually, you know what? When I was watching those shows, I was still aware of what I was eating, why I was eating, and enjoying the food. So I don't think I was mindlessly eating per se.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
Yeah. Okay. It's just like an interesting thing that, like we probably eat different amounts when we're with different people or when we're by ourselves. And I think that's the only thing that is slightly different, in my opinion. It might vary with other people, because my friend said she actually doesn't eat when she's by herself, but when she's with other people, she eats more. And I'm like, oh, you're the complete opposite of me. Like, this is interesting, It's just an interesting observation. And I think mindful eating applies in all scenarios, really. But then what actually are the benefits of mindful eating for our audience?
Yeah, so benefits are the getting to taste your food and getting the pleasure from the food, being able to recognize when you're satisfied, but also the ability to understand your appetite more, which I guess is the key work that we do early on with intuitive eating, which is getting people to really understand their hunger and fullness again. So a lot of people have lost touch with their sense of hunger and their sense of fullness, and there's lots of reasons why. Dieting's one of the biggest. So if people have done lots of diets, they've been following that external advice, like I was saying before, it stops us listening to those internal cues. So we get into the habit of not listening to them. So learning how to tune back in to actually recognize what does feeling a little bit hungry versus feeling, okay, I'm really quite hungry versus, oh my God, I'm ravenous. Most people can recognize when they're ravenous. Most people, certainly nearly everyone who comes to see me initially aren't connected to their early hunger cues. So getting back in tune with that is important. And understanding your fullness too. So there's, fullness is on a spectrum. So that sense of when you've eaten enough, you could eat a little bit more, but perhaps you don't need to, but maybe you've got dessert. So you have some dessert and you've got room for the dessert. So you're a little bit fuller. I like to call that dessert full. So to be able to pick up on all of those things, to recognize when you're satisfied. Actually, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go for it.
For you to feel satisfied after you've eaten, what needs to have happened?
Oof. Tough question, actually. Now I have to think about every time that I've eaten. It has to be, after I felt hungry and I was craving a certain kind of food and I was able to eat that kind of food. And I've also realized recently that the company really matters. Like, I enjoy food way more when I'm with people that I love. Yeah.
So does the food meet your expectations? So you're like, I felt like this and I ate that and it met my expectations taste-wise. That's a key part of satisfaction. Feeling like you've eaten enough is another one. But I often talk about the environment. So there's sort of the three aspects of the taste, the feeling like you've eaten enough, and the environment, which of course in your case involves other people. Well, often it does. When you might be going to a nice restaurant and you want to sit at a table that's not, in a draft or by the toilet or that kind of thing. Or even just at home, because you might be on your own and you're just having a nice space to sit and relax and eat is important. But I guess in terms of eating mindfully allows you to assess all of those things, allows you to pick up on all of those things.
Yeah.
So I guess the importance of some level of mindfulness with eating is to be able to recognize your hunger. Are you enjoying the food? Do you need to add a bit more salt? Maybe it's not quite flooding your boat and you'll leave that bit and have a bit more of this bit.
Yeah.
To recognize when you've eaten enough. And often I'm always saying to my clients, the ability to leave delicious food on your plate, or if you're out to dinner with friends, leave food on the table. The ability to do that is so much more possible when you truly believe that you can eat delicious food whenever you're hungry for it. So because so many people have restrictions around food, or there's like, I shouldn't eat that. And then the eating out becomes the free ticket, of course. So it's like you just get to eat everything. And the mindfulness is not there then. It's more the self-fulfilling prophecy of, okay, I've been quote unquote good all week, so now I'm going to eat everything. And the food, you probably will be tasting the food, enjoying the taste of it. But if you eat to the point that you're too full, stuffed full, what does that do to your satisfaction?
There's none.
Takes away from it.
Yeah.
But so many people say, I can't leave delicious food and that's why I say once you let go of that restrictive way of thinking around food, when you're back in tune with your body, when you're giving yourself permission to eat what you feel like, whenever you feel like it, then you'll find that you can start to leave food if you're not hungry for it anymore.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point. So Aiden in the studio and I, the other day we were talking about his lunch, and I was just making a joke like, "Oh, you should finish that lunch you have there, rice with tuna and seaweed," which he now hates because he's had that too many times. And I'm referring to this conversation because it pops into my head. It's really funny because he was like, I don't feel like eating this anymore. And I was like, no, eat it. You paid for it. You could eat it. It was a joke. But then he was like, he made a really good point. He's like, if I'm not enjoying it, then it's just, sunken cost fallacy, And then I was like, yeah, that's true. But he went ahead and ate it anyway. Anyway, I refer to that example because I thought about other times when I've been out with friends and families, and this goes way back to childhood. And I think families do this. They'll be like, we do not leave food behind. We need to finish everything. And then you kind of get into the habit, if I see food on the table, I need to finish it. Otherwise, we're wasting whatever, like food money, anything that your family might highlight. But like you were saying, it's not that at all. And, being able to leave what you're not enjoying is actually a really hard thing to achieve. It's like a learned skill or something like that. Because, for me, it's extremely hard. And like I have not been able to do that as much. Like now I'm getting better at it, but I also realize this has to do with mindful eating, noticing when we're full. It is hard because we're just going ahead with eating whatever's on our plate rather than thinking about, okay, do I need to eat this? It's hard. It's hard to pay attention.
Yeah. So I guess, mindfulness is obviously much more than just with food. So
Yeah.
I'm always saying to my clients that I feel like as a dietitian, the two most important skills that I help people nurture and develop are not what I learned at uni. But I think that's the case with a lot of careers.
Yeah.
So the two most important skills really that I'm helping people develop, nurture are self-awareness, aka mindfulness, in all aspects, but almost more importantly with our self-talk. So noticing what's going on in your body, emotions, appetite, but the thoughts that you may be having, the ability to notice those thoughts, just pause, take a step back, reframe, reassess, just manage those thoughts in a way that is going to have the best outcome for you. So that self-awareness and self-compassion. Because, of course, we don't always get it right. Well, there is no right. But there will be times when things happen that we're out of our control and, beating ourselves up never helps. So the ability to practice self-compassion, which is also a very difficult skill to learn. And neither can be mastered. I think we can say that.
Yeah, it is extremely hard, I think. And having that self-compassion is key, because sometimes we just beat ourselves up and then that's where we just do the same old thing again and, maybe eat mindlessly.
It can lead to emotional eating.
Yes.
The lack of self-compassion, the judging ourselves, the getting upset with ourselves is one of the key drivers for emotional or comfort eating. But actually, not to get too off topic, the biggest driver for emotional eating, this might be another podcast for you, is restriction. Whether it's restricting total food as in dieting, like total calories or macros to lose weight, restricting particular food types, so it might be a keto diet or any sort of low-carb diet.
Yeah.
Restricting time, so even fasting, the intermittent fasting is a form of restriction. But almost the sneakiest form of restriction is the mental restriction, the thinking we shouldn't be eating something. So I think this is where mindfulness really comes in as well, to be mindful of all the diet thoughts that are going through our head about, I shouldn't be eating this, because it is human psychology to want more we can't have. And the more you mentally restrict, you're more likely to end up eating more of that food than what you intended.
That is interesting. But I'm guessing it doesn't apply to allergies and, things that you shouldn't be eating.
Correct. So really, the only time I say there's only one instance where food causes harm, and that's if you have an anaphylactic food allergy. But people who have an anaphylactic food allergy are usually highly motivated to not eat the food because it's within our biology to want to stay alive. But there's no other food that, you can have a food intolerance, you could have celiac disease where you need to eat a strict gluten-free diet. But for some people with celiac disease, eating gluten doesn't make them feel that unwell. So are they doing their body harm? That's potentially a whole nother topic. I would actually argue if allowing yourself some gluten to allow you to feel better around food in a social situation, when I say allowing gluten, I mean, let's say you've gone out to a restaurant and you've asked for gluten-free because you've got celiac, but there's something comes out and you're not quite sure. Like, in a sense, you can take that risk because it's not going to kill you. And sometimes it's healthier to take that risk to be able to eat and have that social interaction, have that human connection, nurture those relationships with other people. Whereas what happens, and it hasn't been fully classified yet, but the newer eating disorder, or one of the newer eating disorders, orthorexia. Have you heard of orthorexia before?
No.
That's the unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, where people get so anxious about what they're eating and they stop eating out with friends because they don't know what's in the food.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah. So that's just one aspect of it, but it's
what is it called again? Sorry?
Orthorexia. So an unhealthy obsession with healthy eating, where it becomes so restrictive that it interferes with a person's just living their normal life. It's not so much weight focused. It's more quote unquote wellness, wellbeing focused.
Yeah. Well, that's why it can get toxic.
Yeah.
I see. Well, that is a whole other topic in itself. And, we can probably talk about that. But I guess the key here is mindless eating can be caused by a lot of factors, especially those in our head, which is now interesting for me to learn because, when I really think about it, the time that I've emotionally eaten is probably because I was like, oh, yeah, I shouldn't be eating this. Or, other times it could actually be because of other things like, oh, this ice cream is the only good thing in my life.
Yeah.
It's not. I think it's about redirecting attention as well. It's not just about the self-talk about around, like I'm not good enough or I shouldn't be eating this. I think it's also around recognizing what else is good in our lives. I think that's also kind of like another piece that is hard for a lot of people because I know a lot of my friends who used to just not be that into food that much, but then, something happens in their lives and then food becomes comfort. And I'm like, oh, it's very like it's an interesting thing to notice. And then when, other aspects in their life kind of goes better and then they notice this tendency and redirect their attention, they tend to have a better relationship with food. And I can confirm this, myself included. It's a continuous journey. It's never going to end. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about it. I'm no expert, so just throwing in that observation.
No, there is healthy emotional eating. Actually, the most recent blog on my website is about healthy emotional eating. So if you've had a bit of a rough day and you're feeling a bit low and you're like, oh, I just want to watch my favourite movie, maybe not Aliens in this case, but my favourite movie and enjoy a bowl of ice cream, that's healthy emotional eating. If you enjoy that ice cream and it gives you a bit of comfort and pleasure. So pleasure, as we touched on earlier, is integral to our well-being. And because a lot of us, we live busy lives, there's lots of stresses, there's lots of issues. A simple way for us to get pleasure, our mental health needs pleasure. A simple way to get pleasure is food. And there should be nothing wrong with that. There shouldn't be any shame in that.
Yeah.
But there's a whole lot of shame that comes along with that, particularly when a person might be struggling or has weight concern.
Yeah. But then would you say that it's going to be some sort of harm or harmful behaviors when it's like something you choose to do daily? Because, once every now and again is fine. But if you do that every day or every meal, that's going to be a big problem, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, enjoying a bowl of ice cream daily is probably not going to do any harm. But if you're using food to comfort in a way that you don't feel good about yourself afterwards or the amount you eat makes you feel physically sick and you're doing that on a daily basis, then yes, that's where I would suggest reaching out to either a dietitian who works with this intuitive eating framework or a psychologist. And that's, part of the work we do within the intuitive eating framework is around emotional eating and finding other ways to get that pleasure or meet those needs other than food. So yes, you can use food sometimes, but have other tools as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point there because I think it's a tricky topic to talk about, especially because, it depends on each person's health. If we're saying, mindfully eat, enjoy it and then it feels good, maybe in that moment. But, if it's causing harm to someone's health, then I think it's a conversation that they need to have with professionals. Yeah. And so that's a caveat, I guess.
Yeah, and that's when I'm having this conversation with clients, that's where I say the food is actually not the problem. The food is the symptom. The emotional eating is the symptom. What you need to get the bottom of is what's driving that. What's underneath that. That's the thing that needs treating, not the food.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Before we get sidetracked, let's get back on mindful eating. It's a very good topic. I think it opens up, different doors, and all these doors are interesting to explore. It's kind of like, Christmas, 12 doors. Anyway, let's talk about something a bit more practical. So we've covered the theoretical aspect of mindful eating. Actually, you have mentioned quite a few things that we can practice, but for our audience who is new to this or who might have had, the wrong perception of mindful eating before, what is a practice you would recommend to them to start trying maybe today so that they can practice mindful eating in the right way?
Good question. So it might be just setting aside just one meal or one snack for over the next few days where you just choose. And so I encourage my clients to say choose a meal or choose a favourite food, like a snack, and chocolate is one of the most popular that people choose. And choose a moment where you're going to sit down and break up that chocolate. I'll use that as the example. Put it into, if you've got a favourite little bowl, little dish. I love little dishes. Yeah. And sit somewhere that's nice and comfortable and actually go through that process of just look at your chocolate. Look at the different colours and shapes and textures. Have a good smell of it. then lift a piece of, and then pick up a piece of chocolate and take a bite, and just notice how it feels on your lips and your mouth, and notice the taste as you chew it. So I'm not expecting people to eat. You don't always have to eat chocolate like this. This would just be a one-off, or you might do it a couple of times, where you're just really tasting that food or really connecting with how the food looks, how it smells, how it tastes. And then the more you eat, don't set any limit on it. Don't say, I'm just going to do it with 3 squares of chocolate. Just break off whatever you feel like. You can go back and get more. And then just not sort of noticing how it's feeling in your body as you eat. And, as I said earlier, there's no correct way to eat mindfully. So I guess some version of that. Also, another important point is there's nothing that should happen or shouldn't happen. So there are diet versions of mindful eating, which is eat mindfully and you'll eat less. Or eat mindfully and you'll discover that you won't like it as much as what you thought. That is not the point of mindful eating. The point is that food meeting your expectations? And occasionally some people have an epiphany. Sometimes the epiphany is like, oh my God, I hadn't noticed that particular texture or flavour, and it's like awesome. Sometimes the epiphany is, this is a cute little expression, some food can lose its sparkle. So one of my most recent client examples is with Twiggy sticks. This lady that thought she loved her Twiggy sticks, and when she sat down and did it with them, she was like, oh, they're not actually that great. So, that can happen.
That's great to know.
But it's not that that's supposed to happen, which I think Weight Watchers sort of had a version of that at some point. So it's just, so that's a little practice that just maybe put aside some time to do that as a one-off. You could do it with a snack food, with a meal food. And then I guess as a daily practice, that might be just maybe picking one meal or one snack a day where there's just that extra moment to go, okay, I'm hungry. I think I'm going to have my muesli bar for afternoon tea, and to sit somewhere and just, as you're taking the wrapper off it, actually look at it. And if you're like me and you like the Carmen's ones with the chocolate on them, like just, look at the yumminess of it and just enjoy it as you're eating it.
Yeah, the Carmen's ones are so good.
So, yeah.
That's a great practice. 2 practices, actually. So, those are good to try. Thank you for sharing those.
No worries.
And now is your open mic. I think this is great because we've mentioned intuitive eating quite a few times in the podcast so far. And I know you want to talk about that, more.
Yeah.
So let's hear it. I think it's very fascinating. So let's learn more about intuitive eating.
So the way I introduce this to my clients is to say it is not something new and magical, that the 2 American dietitians who coined the term, they didn't invent it. It's how we're born eating. So no breastfeeding mother needs to know how much milk to give her baby. No bottle feeding parent needs to know how much milk to give their baby. No parent needs to know how much food to give their toddler. Toddlers will demand food when they're hungry and often start throwing it on the floor when they've had enough. So we are born instinctually responding to our hunger and fullness. And ultimately, that's a key part of intuitive eating. So as an adult, it's, as I said earlier, learning what those hunger and fullness cues are. And they're hormonal signals. Ghrelin is our main hunger hormone and leptin the main fullness one. So it's really just getting back in tune with our bodies to understand what our different levels of hunger are, what our different levels of fullness are, and what satisfies us. So we spoke a lot about satisfaction earlier. It is arguably the most important principle of intuitive eating, because you can eat something that tastes delicious, but if it's not quite enough, you may not be satisfied and you might go looking for something else. You can eat something that fills you up, that might be the quote-unquote healthiest meal in the world, but if it didn't really meet your expectations taste-wise, you might find yourself, in the tub of ice cream a bit later. So, and satisfaction means different things to different people as well. And it'll be different depending on the time of day, the meal, the social situation. There's so many things that influence it. So really intuitive eating is about making you the expert of your body. You're the only person that knows how hungry you are or when you're hungry. You're the only person that knows when you've eaten enough. And you are the only person that knows what satisfies you. So it's really giving you the power back to be able to trust your own body rather than doing what the world says you should be doing food-wise. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. I think that's great. I really like that, because when you mentioned that an example of toddlers and babies, I was like, I have noticed quite a few parents. I mean, not here. I don't interact with a lot of families here yet. But when I was in Vietnam and interacted with my families in my extended families, I noticed that a lot of them force their kids to eat more. One more bite. Come on, do it. My nieces and nephews all go through this, and I was like, maybe I was going through the same thing when I was growing up, and I find that to be a bit strange. Maybe they don't want to eat what is given to them. Or maybe they're just not hungry.
Yeah. So interesting. So I'm sure some of your listeners will be familiar with what's called baby-led weaning. So I don't have children. I have fur children, not skin children, as I like to call them. My sister does. And so, they're a little bit older now, but when they were babies, it's probably when I was first started doing all this work, and I was talking to her about it, and she's like, that's exactly what I'm doing with my two little boys. When they were babies, toddlers, this baby-led weaning, which is just letting them decide of whatever food you put out, letting them decide what they want to eat, how much they want to eat. It is also from a large body of work. So there's an American dietitian called SIHA. So it's called the Division of Responsibility, which actually came along before baby-led weaning. Baby-led weaning, my understanding, is based on the division of responsibility. So Ellen Satter uses the term competent eating. And she was probably the first person really to introduce the world to intuitive eating. So competent eating is intuitive eating. It's all the same things, but it's all her work. If you go to the Ellen Satter Institute, if you've got kids and you're wanting to learn more, so she started her work in the 60s or 70s. And the intuitive eating, the dietitians who coined the term intuitive eating, that's more directed at adults, but essentially it's the same thing. And I think that many parents in Western culture as well will just say, finish everything on your plate and get the kids to keep eating. And I can only guess that that's a hangover from a time where food wasn't as abundant as it is now. So once upon a time, when there was food available, we needed to eat it all because we didn't necessarily know when the next meal was, if there was going to be enough food. But now we have an overabundance of food, certainly in the Western world, and for people who financially can access all the food that they need, we end up overfeeding our kids. I think that's just because our parents did it, because their parents did it, because their parents did it. But there was a time when perhaps it was necessary.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Certainly the time now is to let go of that.
Yeah, I think, it's hard to let go of, it's kind of like old habits die hard. It's hard to let go of that, especially when you're so used to it and you've been brought up that way. And, it's like generation on generation on generation. Yeah. This new generation has, new issues and new ways of doing things. And, I think that learning and adapting is hard, which is why even the concept of mindful eating, which is something we have talked about before on this show, even today, it has a new perspective on it completely. And I think the more we have these conversations, the better, because I think it's this healthy relationship we have with how we see ourselves and how we see others, because we have this tendency to judge. It's not just about ourselves, but also how we influence others. So, like today I've learned a few new things about mindful eating, and I've learned that it's healthy to emotionally eat a bowl of ice cream when I need it, and, probably not going to impact my health as long as I'm taking care of my body and my mental health and my other aspects of well-being. And I think that's a good thing that we need to talk more about. You shouldn't eat it, you shouldn't eat that.
Oh, I'm glad you've learned something.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this because it helps me personally, and I'm sure it's going to help our audience too. You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.